Hello everyone, my name is Wade Bradford. Welcome to my channel. Today I am presenting a little lecture, a little discussion about a word that you may or may not be familiar with, and that word is irony. So today we're going to cover a few different definitions of irony, and we're going to look at examples of irony in literature. So if we're looking for a basic definition of irony, let's go with this. Let's say that irony is a sharp contrast to one's expectations. That means an ironic situation can be something in which there was one expectation and the opposite occurred. But at the same time, irony is not just a surprise. For example, if I'm running down the road, chasing my little toy boat in the rain, I'm not expecting to find a clown in a sewer. But that's not irony, right? That's a terrible, unfortunate surprise, perhaps. It's a shock. But it's not exactly irony. So irony is not just a surprise, and it's not just something that's unfortunate. It's not just, oh, I expected to win the race and I lost the race. Irony. No, irony is a bit more sophisticated that way. One of my first times in the classroom trying to teach irony, I had a student that had no idea what irony was. And so I was trying to say, well, it's a sharp contrast to one's expectations. And he said, oh, is that like getting hit by a Dodge? And that is brilliant. I love that little idea. Yes, getting hit by a Dodge, because a car, right now, if you say getting hit by a car, that just sucks. But a car called a Dodge, and the word Dodge means to, get out of the way of something. And so if you get hit by a Dodge, there's irony there. So irony can be about the words that we're using and sort of the wordplay that goes on with expectations. I'm trying to find a better place to film so the sun's not in your eyes. So a simple, very common form of irony that we hear every day, especially in America, is sarcasm. When we use sarcasm, we are saying something that is the opposite of what we mean. So if I were to drop my iced tea onto the ground and it spills all over, and I say, oh, great, that would be sarcastic because I don't think it's great. Have you ever met anyone that doesn't understand sarcasm? I had a friend back in high school. She didn't understand sarcasm. So if I dropped something and it broke or it spilt or it made a mess and I said, oh, that's wonderful, she would look at me and say, oh, why is that wonderful? Unless she was being ironic. It's hard to tell. So with sarcasm, yeah, anytime you're saying, oh, that's great, or that's perfect, and you really don't mean that, that would be examples of sarcasm, which is a form of irony. But let's get to the good stuff. See, English teachers, like myself, we love irony. We crave it. We're kind of addicted to irony. That line about getting hit by a Dodge, right, that does something in our English teacher brain where we're like, oh, the irony is delicious. So when there are stories that have ironic endings, these kind of twists that we probably should expect, but we don't, and it's in some type of sharp contrast or opposition, maybe an opposite to what our expectations were as a reader, that delights us. But again, if I just have, if I'm watching a movie or reading a book and my expectation is, oh, the hero is going to win at the end of the story, and it turns out, oh, the hero doesn't win, that's not the type of defied expectation that I'm talking about to be ironic. Again, it's this sharp contrast. So just having the hero that you expect to win, just having the hero lose, that's not enough to be that kind of delicious irony that we're looking for. But if we have a story where the hero is setting out to stop a disaster from happening, and by doing so, he actually causes that disaster. When you, as a character, cause the thing that you were trying to prevent, there's some irony there in the story. So be on the lookout for stories that have those kind of twists, that sort of ironic turn of events, and that is probably what we would call structural irony within the story. So that's a great form of irony to look for. If you haven't done so yet, I want you to read two stories that I think provide nice twists at the end, and they've irony within the stories. Structural irony is embedded within these stories. And those two stories are The Lottery by Shirley Jackson and The Necklace. In a future video, I'm going to be talking about both of those, so definitely read The Lottery and The Necklace. The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, The Necklace by Guy de Maupassant. Oh, but we're not done talking about irony yet, because one of my favorite forms of irony that we see in stories and in movies is called dramatic irony. And dramatic irony is any time we, the reader or the audience, we know more about the situation than the character does. Now that doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, well, I'm smarter than that character, that dum-dum on the screen there, that's dramatic irony. No, not necessarily. Again, it's about the situation. So if you are watching a scary movie and the movie shows you the monster creeping into the house at night and hiding in the closet, and that monster has hungry jaws and fierce claws, and you know, as an audience member, you know that monster is waiting inside the closet to gobble up the first person that opens up the door. But all of the people living in the house that kind of, are walking around at night, maybe they hear a little bumper sound or something like that, or they're going into the kitchen to get a midnight snack. The people in the house, they have no idea that there's a monster in the closet. And maybe the dad says, oh, I'm kind of cold. I think I'm going to grab a jacket from the closet door, and he's reaching for the handle, and you feel like screaming, no, don't do that. That's dramatic irony. So in that case, we, the audience, we know more than the dad that's about to open the closet door. One of my favorite examples of dramatic irony comes from the classic play that you were probably forced to read in middle school, Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet has this awesome dramatic irony that creates tension within the audience, and that happens towards the end. I'm going to spoil things if you don't know. Romeo and Juliet, they die at the end. But their death, of course, is sad and it's tragic, but there's also this dramatic irony that's involved in their death, and it's this. Romeo and Juliet, they love each other, and they want to be together, but they can't. They're separated by the prejudice and hostility of each of their families. So the well-meaning friar decides, like, hey, you know what? I'm going to get you guys together. Here's what I'm going to do. Now, he doesn't tell Romeo this plan because Romeo's away hiding. So he just tells Juliet, hey Juliet, I'm going to give you this potion. It's going to make you fall asleep, and it's going to make you look like you're dead. You're not dead, but you're going to look dead. Your family's going to think you're dead. Everybody's going to think you're dead, and they're going to put you in a tomb, and you will wake up in that tomb. So I'm going to make sure that Romeo gets the message that you are alive, and then Romeo's going to rush by your sleeping side, and when you wake up in the tomb, he's going to be there with you, and you are going to run away together. You're going to be free from your prejudiced families. So Juliet says, okay, let's go for it. So she drinks the potion, falls asleep, and everybody thinks she's dead, including Romeo, because Romeo doesn't get the message. So when Romeo finds out the news, the rumor, that Juliet is dead, he goes to her tomb to see her lying there, looking like she's dead, and he's got not a sleeping potion, but actual poison. So when he does that and the audience is watching, the audience knows more than Romeo does. We've seen the situation. We know what's happening. There's this contrast there, right? This sharp contrast between what Romeo knows about the situation and what we, the audience, know about the situation. And it creates this tension, right? We want to rush the stage and shake Romeo and say, no, she's alive. I did that once and they asked me to leave, so I don't recommend it. Now, if you're a part of my Introduction to Literature class, then I asked you to read The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin, and I also asked you this question: how should readers feel about the main character, Mrs. Mallard? How should we feel about her? Now, I could have asked you a different question. I could have asked you, hey, how do you feel about Mrs. Mallard? And that's a good question to explore. What are your personal opinions about Mrs. Mallard and the situation that she is in? But I didn't ask you that question. I asked you, how should readers feel about her? The reason why I asked that is because I want you to start thinking, when you're writing for literature classes, I want you to start thinking of not just expressing your own opinions, saying like, oh, this is what I think, and this is what I feel, and this is what I believe about this story. But instead, think about writing essays that persuade your reader to interpret the work the way you are interpreting the work. So ask yourself, what messages should the readers take away from this? How should the readers feel? Or how should the readers interpret the actions of these characters? Start thinking about persuading the reader. All right, so I asked you to look at the story of an hour and asked you, how should readers feel about it? Now, a lot of readers, when they read this story of an hour, they feel very bad for this character. I'm going to spoil things, so if you have not read the story of an hour, you might want to stop this video now. In a nutshell, the story of an hour, poor Mrs. Mallard finds out at the very beginning of the story that her husband has been killed in a train accident. And she is young, but she's got a frail heart, so her sister and the friend of the family, Richards, I think his name is, they're worried about, telling her the news, and so they tell her the news as gently as possible, and she goes into her room and she cries, and then she stops crying and she feels something strange coming, some strange emotion. That emotion that finally creeps in upon her is joy and elation. She feels like, wow, I'm free. Now, keep in mind, this story takes place in the 1800s, late 1800s America, and so she is now realizing that she's free. She didn't necessarily hate her husband, but maybe she didn't really love him that much. But what she does know is that by being married to Brentley Mallard, her husband, she had all of these expectations, all of these rules, and all of these, basically her life was just kind of set out for her, and she was going to have to basically adhere to the will of her husband and basically society's will in general. But now she feels that she has all this free time. She has this freedom that she's never experienced before. In fact, it's said in the narration that it was just the other day that she was wishing that life would be short, and now she wishes that life would be long. So when she has this revelation, she feels like a goddess of victory. She opens the door and her sister's like, "Are you okay?" She's like, "I'm fine, I'm good." And she walks down the stairs, and as she's doing so, lo and behold, the door opens up. Brentley Mallard, her husband. He wasn't in a train accident. His name was on the list of killed, but he was far away from the scene of the crime. He's walking home instead of taking the train, apparently. And he had no idea that there's a train accident. So he walks in, she sees her husband, and dies. Now there's this gap in this story at the very end, right? It describes all of those things in a much better way than I've described. But it basically, after she sees her husband, then it just gives us a couple sentences saying that the doctors tell Brentley Mallard that she died of a joy that kills. So again, dramatic irony happens when we know more information than the characters do. So Brentley Mallard, the husband, and the doctors, they think, oh, poor Mrs. Mallard. She was so overjoyed to see you, Brentley Mallard, walk through the door. Her fragile heart was so filled with sudden joy that she had to leave this life in this world. But we know that she was actually ecstatic about her husband passing away, supposedly, and excited for the freedom that she was about to embrace, and that she instead, most likely, died of sudden shock and grief and extreme disappointment. So that's why the story has dramatic irony, because Brentley Mallard and the doctors think something, but we know more about the situation than they do. So looking at that story with that lens of the dramatic irony, we can see that no one, the doctors, Brentley Mallard, the sister, the friend Richards, society in general, no one really understands how Mrs. Mallard really feels. And therefore, she's very lonely and isolated. And we can see that as emblematic of this male-dominated patriarchal society of the 1800s, when women were expected to be married and stay married, and the idea of liberation for women was certainly not ingrained within society at the time. So with that lens, we could argue that yes, the reader should feel very sympathetic for her. One more form of irony that we want to talk about, though, is cosmic irony. Cosmic irony, we see that in like the old Greek plays where the gods are intervening and meddling with people like Oedipus Rex. So let's think of cosmic irony as irony of fate, meaning that a god or deity character, or maybe just fate or karma or the will of the universe, is orchestrating and manipulating the events to have this ironic outcome. Whatever sort of a higher power is perhaps within the workings of the story is manipulating and kind of mocking and toying with the protagonist. By the way, if you like some of these definitions I'm talking about, I'm basically paraphrasing from A Glossary of Literary Terms by M.H. Abrams. It's a wonderful book that served me well over the years. It's still in print. Definitely go get a copy of this if you want to nerd it up and be very literary. So, how might cosmic irony be working within the story of an hour? Well, we talked about how Mrs. Mallard finds out that her husband is dead, and then goes into her room, starts to cry, and then stops crying pretty soon, and then feels joy. It's called in the narration this monstrous joy. So she's feeling joy about her husband's demise, her husband's death in a train wreck. She's feeling joy. So there are many readers, when they read that part of the story, they don't like Mrs. Mallard anymore, if they ever did, right? So they don't feel sympathetic toward Mrs. Mallard because she's feeling this monstrous joy at the death of her husband. And one could argue that because she's feeling this monstrous joy, that some kind of nameless fate is intervening within this story, and basically we're seeing this woman's like, oh, you're feeling joyful that your husband has died? Well, turns out he's alive, and once more, you are going to be the one that dies at the end of this story. Cosmic irony, right? So again, this sort of turn of events, it's usually unfortunate events. Cosmic irony is usually about manipulating, toying with, poking with. You can still have, a happy resolution, positive endings when cosmic irony is in play, but there's usually bad things are going to happen, and the protagonist will feel that the fates are against them. Ooh, the hawk screaming, he agrees with me. So focusing on the cosmic irony that's potentially within the story of an hour, you could say that, oh, she gets her comeuppance, or karma, or that wheel of fate is turning, and a form of poetic justice takes place at the end of the story. But that's the fun thing about literature. You can argue in whatever direction you want, as long as you are backing it up with evidence, ideas, analysis, and interpretation. So that's a little glimpse into irony and what we can do with irony and how we go about persuading the reader to see and interpret the story in ways that we do as well. That's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. I look forward to talking to you soon.